Freddie Joe Farnsworth as well is actually in the UK as well at the moment. I bumped into him recently. So, and Freddie Joe, I think he turns up in a horse in one on a horse in one episode, but he was one of the cadre. I think Ross was he was Ross's sergeant when we were at boot camp. Freddie Joe Farnsworth. We had Sergeant E as well. There was a few of those guys, but I bumped into a lot of the English actors recently. Michael Fassbender I bumped into not so long ago, and James McAvoy.
When you first talked with Farnsworth and Dye, were you completely intimidated by those guys?
Absolutely. Can I lie? No, I mean, I've seen Men of Their Metal before, and I just didn't bat an eye, God damn it. Those guys, I know what they're like. Yeah, of course you can't not be. You know, we all sort of stood up and tried to keep our back straight and our eyes, you know, staring ahead in a firm and steely manner. But the truth is, we were all quaking in our boots. Calisthenics at 6 o'clock, everybody. I want to see you bright and early. Let's go. You know, and this man, I don't know how old he was then, 55 or something, but he'd run those, you know, that 5 kilometre run or whatever it was every morning, 6 miles or however far he made us go. He would just charge around like, you know, he was a 20-year-old guy, and the rest of us were all just lagging behind him going, oh my God, this guy's a maniac. He's insane. He's just got so much energy. And he would be that way until 10 o'clock at night when he would finish his lectures and we'd finally get to go to bed for 3 hours, you know. And Freddie Joe was good at it as well. The thing is about Freddie Joe is that you get to know him. The man has a heart of gold. I mean, he's such a great guy. And but he knew how to drill, and he knew how to make us feel the urgency and the importance of what it was for to be in control of other men's lives, and that you had to toe the line because your own safety depended on it. That was always the thing I got from Freddie Joe. It was kind of like, I'm going to shout and humiliate you and make you feel intimidated, but at the end of the day, I'm doing it for your own good, because this way you just might survive one day longer. There was kind of that sort of element to it, you know, because, you know, he's a great man, Freddie, in his own way as well, you know. I mean, there's always a great camaraderie amongst these guys, and although there's this kind of intimidating exterior, you know that you're all in it together, and you know that's kind of nice thing.
When you were researching the part of John Martin, did you get to talk with the real John Martin, and was that was he helpful in researching his character?
Yeah, I mean, yes and yes, no, if you see what I mean. Johnny, who's sadly dead now, was alive then. I mean, he passed, I don't know, maybe 3 years ago now, Johnny, 4 years. And at first I think I was kind of nervous to speak to him, because I didn't, you know, I knew we would be talking about big and important things that happened to this man in his life that would, to me, would be kind of, you know, fairly sort of, not flippant, but just questions like, hey, Johnny, how did you feel about when you first landed in France and were confronted with the first Nazi, your first Nazi, you know, which is kind of like, okay, this is an interesting question, but for me, it's just a question. For Johnny, there's a huge emotional response before he can get to the answer.
Right.
Because... you know, these guys lived through it, and what for the first couple of months I didn't talk to Johnny, but then I got to speak to him on the phone, and obviously these guys were very proud and happy that their story was being told, and there's that initial wonderful connection. But then you start trying to talk and ask stories, and what I quickly realised was, even though here we were 60 years later, that there was a man still dealing with it in his own way. It was still, you know, it still held resonance for him on a deep emotional level. And what for me was a fairly sort of interesting research question, for him was like a massive moment in his life, because we're talking about life or death situations for him at 22 years old. And so I kind of realised that, but that was very informative in a way, because I realised I was playing someone who was emotionally responding to what he was in the situation he was in. He wasn't just kind of charging around, you know, fighting a war. He was living through fighting a war, if you see what I mean. And so that then impressed upon me what I talked about before is like there's a responsibility, you know, in telling these stories. All of us felt that. I think that's to a man. I would say that's true. That, you know, we all understood that, you know, when Ross finds the concentration camp in episode 9, it's, you know, the power and impact of it is huge, because by that time we all knew, you know, what these things really meant, you know.
How much of that meeting did you use to create your portrayal of John Martin?
I suppose I kind of just relied on my acting abilities and craft to create who I thought he was, or who I, you know, understood him to be from the book, from Ambrose's book, and funny enough, meeting Garnier was a more interesting insight. Bill, because Bill and John were great friends, and so when Bill and Babe came to the set, and they were the first veterans that we really met. Of course, everyone wanted to talk to those guys about the person they were playing. And it's kind of interesting because, you know, you've got someone who's a very good friend of the person kind of giving you their impressions or their anecdotes or their feelings or who they understood that person to be. And that kind of opened up a bigger window as well, for me, you know, just to hear Johnny talked about as opposed to talking to Johnny. So because Bill, you know, had a great affection for John, and I think that was absolutely mutual. And it was funny because Frank and I have become subsequently great friends as well, and that's just one of those amazing coincidences. So I think it was also a very clever casting, really, on the behalf of Tom and Stephen and, you know, Meg Lieberman and all these wonderful people who are involved in the side of pulling together this sort of amazing ensemble of actors. It was kind of like, you know, if you were a sergeant, all these kind of sergeants stood out as guys that you could rely on, go-to guys, you know, Richard Speight and, Scott Grimes, yeah, and Donnie Wahlberg, and, you know, all these kind of people who it was kind of really well constructed, very well thought out, very considered.